We saw this 1860 Cole County census at the beginning of this presentation. We know that George, who lived next door to William, was not Henry's brother and could not be Henry's brother, though in 1891 he said he was Henry's brother. We recognize at a glance that this 1860 William and Elizabeth and family who lived next door to Henry and Annie are the very same William and Elizabeth and family who lived in 1850 Bradley County, in the same county where George Daniel Gann was living. And we know that brothers often settle near each other. And we know that in 1842, William Gann of Jefferson County, whose bondsman was the husband of Mary Gann's sister, took a wife named Elizabeth, and that she was a sister of Susan, who married Adam Alfred, whose bondsman had also been Allen Harris. And we know that brothers oftentimes married sisters. And we see that in this 1860 census that William Gann was 40 years of age, which means he was born in 1820, which is the identical birth year of the William Gann of the 1840 census when correlated with the 1830 census, and which places this William Gann as the third son of Mary Gann. And we recognize that this William Gann is overwhelmingly going to be the same William Gann who was head of household in the District Number 36 Jefferson County School Census, who was sandwiched between Mary of the previous school year and Henry of the next school year. There is no doubt that William Gann of this census was in fact Henry Gann's brother, and this William Gann, again, there can be no doubt that he was Mary Gann's third son. And the DNA of William's descendants tells us that he was also Mary's child, born to an enduring relationship with Joseph Birchfield. Mary had no other men in her life. This chart shows 7 of Joseph's Birchfield surnamed children by his first wife listed along the left margin. I know this is not readable. The larger chart is outside, and Charlie is going to take care of getting those posted so you can see that. The Birchfield descendants, the Birchfield surnamed descendants, there are 7 of them on the left margin. And these are children born to Joseph's first wife, Susanna. Descendants of those 7 children are named in 26 rows. 4 of Joseph's descendants from William Gann are in columns across the top. Only 3 of William's descendants were willing to share data today. And that is also a disappointment when people don't want to publicly share data. The numbers are expressed in centimorgans of the total amount of autosomal DNA shared in common. Pam in the first column, and she's a descendant of William, shares DNA with 22 of those 26 Birchfield descendants. Well, I thought that was pretty good, folks. That gives me goosebumps, you know. Only Pam in the first column was tested at Ancestry DNA. That's why she has the most matches. It's the largest database of testers. Everyone should test at Ancestry DNA first, because that's where you are most likely to find your most matches. Ellen and John in the second and third columns did Family Finder test. Ellen's and John's kits cannot be compared to Birchfield kits tested at Ancestry DNA unless the Ancestry testers put their kits on GEDmatch or upload them to Family Finder. Most of them had not done either one at the time I gathered data for this chart, and I was still compiling this chart as recently as 2 weeks ago. So again, that's a disappointment because you cannot compare across platforms. GEDmatch levels the field and you can compare, but we're dependent on people uploading their kids to GEDmatch. That's why the Facebook group, why it gets stressed so much. If Ellen and John had tested at Ancestry DNA, I really don't have any doubt that they would likely have just as many matches that Pam does, equally high numbers. Pam's descendant in the fourth column that's blank, his kid is not on GEDmatch, and I doubt that he will ever put it there. Now this is kind of the big picture, and again the chart is out in the lobby. I want to cover a few details. Of the three featured Gann descendants, all three of them have very strong high matches to Emmett Adams, who is a descendant of Joseph's son, John Birchfield. John's kid has several triangulated matches with Emmett of less than 50 centimorgans, but I do not know who the third individuals are, as they have not replied to my emails, and they do not have GEDcoms. Ditto for Pam and Ellen. Ellen and John have the same start position with Joseph's descendant Ruth on chromosome 8, and Ruth is one of John's triangulated matches with Emmett. And she did respond to my email request for more info about her tree. It turns out that Emmett is her uncle. Ellen and John share additional DNA with Ruth on chromosome 22, but those segments do not occur at the same or on overlapping locations. All three of William Gann's descendants have low 5 centimorgan matches to a descendant of Joseph's daughter, Harriet Susanna. Harriet Susanna, by the way, they immigrated to Crawford County, Arkansas, which is just across the river from where Adam Alfred settled. Don't know if that's coincidence or if that was planned. Typically, matches below 7 centimorgans are thrown out, but sometimes they bear worth looking at. The matches in this case are likely statistically valid for both Ellen and John because they appear on chromosome 11 at the exact same start and stop points. We do not consider them to be a triangulated match with Harriet Susanna's descendant because Ellen and John are siblings. A true triangulated match needs to come from 3 different lines back to a same most recent common ancestor. These small segments, however, are indicative of a Birchfield sticky segment that was passed down intact and undivided from Ellen and John's mother to them, and they are Birchfield segments. Both Pam and Ellen share DNA with Sharon, who is a descendant of Joseph's daughter, Mary Polly, but not on the same chromosomes. Pam shares one segment of 10.3 centimorgans with Sharon on chromosome 14, and Ellen shares 2 segments with Sharon on chromosome 4 and 17. So we're getting into being able to do some mapping here of what are specific segments that go back to Joseph that different descendants inherited. The 7.8 centimorgan segment on chromosome 4 is statistically valid. We cannot say at this time whether that 5.2 on chromosome 17 may be valid or not. It's possible since she shares DNA on another location. Here is the descendancy chart for the same 4 William Gann descendants that I showed you on the previous slide. Jim Bales in blue on the lower right corner, who did not want his DNA matches shared in the previous slide, is featured here, and he knows that. That's cool. Jim is a descendant of Mary Gann through William Gann. This chart shows a match that Jim has to Larry Gann in the gold box on the right, on the far right. Larry Gann is a 3rd great-grandson of Alexander Gann, Mary Gann's brother. Jim has a terrific 32 centimorgan match across 2 segments to Larry. This is definitely a thrilling DNA match because their most recent common ancestor is Elizabeth Gann. This match can be mapped directly to Elizabeth. William's DNA that passed down to his great-great-grandson Jim Bales is DNA that William inherited from his mother, Mary Gann, who inherited it from her mother, Elizabeth Gann. Let's look at a different Larry Gann, who also matches Alexander's descendant Larry Gann. This is a chart of Mary Gann with two of her sons from Joseph Birchfield. George Daniel Gann, Mary's first son, is in the blue box on the top left. William, her third son, is in the blue box on the top right. We just looked at Jim Bales and Larry Gann match on the previous slide, and they are on the right side of the screen. George Daniel's descendant, who is also named Larry, shares DNA with Alexander's descendant named Larry. The two men named Larry share 13.1 centimorgans of DNA on chromosome 2 with each other. Their most recent common ancestor is Elizabeth Gann. George Daniel's great-great-grandson named Larry, who inherited DNA from George, and George inherited it from his mother, Mary, who inherited it from her mother, Elizabeth. These are exactly the kinds of intergenerational DNA matches one likes to see emerge, and it further confirms that William Gann was a son of Mary Gann. Since Alexander was a fairer son of Elizabeth and not a Gann son, Alexander's descendant, Larry, functions as our differential, letting us know that the shared DNA between all three individuals comes down from Elizabeth. There can be no doubt that Elizabeth, I didn't mean to go there first, there can be no doubt that Mary Gann was indeed a daughter of Elizabeth Gann. Now we'll get here. This is another chart, and I know the detail on this one is also too small to see, but Elizabeth, and let me get up here, it's still too small to see. The chart, can you see Elizabeth in the dark, I don't know what color they show up here, watermelon or something? Can you see Elizabeth in, okay, that is Elizabeth, by the way, even though you can't read it. Elizabeth occurs in a third position in this chart, and this chart is 6 feet long, and it's out in the hallway. And this is a chart that compares Mary Gann's descendants to only the first child of Joseph Birchfield by his first marriage. He had so many children that, anyway, you have to do it individually. On the far left, we see that Alexander Gann's grandson married a great-great-granddaughter of Joseph Birchfield. Along the very bottom of this chart, and this data along this line at the bottom, is the amount of DNA that they share with descendants of Mary's sons. Now here are Mary's sons. I'm even having trouble saying this, moving, it's so large. We have George Daniel, and we have Adam Alfred here, and we have William over here. I haven't worked on it enough to separate which is the Gann DNA that's on the bottom line on this chart versus what is the Birchfield DNA. But they share, obviously, both. The descendants of Mary share both with those. A paper copy of this chart is out front, so you can look at it there, but let me explain what you'll be seeing as I've been kind of sort of trying to do. It will show you how William Gann's descendants stack up in terms of how much Birchfield DNA they inherited compared to descendants of George Daniel Gann and Adam Alfred Gann, to the same Birchfield surname descendants on the left margin. Now, the same conditions still apply. Some people don't want their DNA numbers shared. So there are some blanks in rows and boxes, that's to be expected, in columns. Testers who have not uploaded their kits to GEDmatch cannot be compared across different testing platforms. At this generational level, where the majority of testers are fourth cousins, with Joseph as a third great-grandfather, we are either going to share some or none. I have indicated none where matches could be run and reported. Some of the matches are fairly low, but nothing is below 5 centimorgans, and all matches contain 500 or more SNPs, which is short for short nucleotide polymorphisms, which is a lot easier to say SNPs than the other. Some matches run on the high side, but a comparison of trees does not indicate that there are other ancestors who were shared in common. Because of random recombination, it is to be expected that some descendants will inherit more of an ancestor's autosomal DNA than others will.